Paris, Texas has a lot of history behind its name, and unfortunately, some of the stories in its history not so good, fiendishly bad, such as the story that I'm about to tell you right now. Paris, Texas has a weird vibe to it. It kind of reminds me of certain parts of Alabama for some unknown reason. So we're going to go back in time. We're going to go back to the early part of January 1893. So there's a black guy. He lives in town here in Paris, Texas. His name is Henry Smith. He's a laborer, right? Known around town as a little slow mentally and like to drink a little bit too much sometimes. It's not clearly known if he had children for sure or not. But what is known is that this story definitely happened, and you be the judge on whether it was deserved or not. So on a late night, January 1893, Henry was out and about drinking a little bit too much and acting disorderly. And so one of the law enforcement officers that was on duty that night was one Henry Vance. Now, they start exchanging words, and it looks like Officer Vance is going to want to take Smith in just to cool his heels for at least the night in the local county jail. And Henry Smith ain't having no part of it. So they start fighting, and, Henry Vance, he pulls out the club and starts playing whack-a-mole with Henry Smith. Gave him a good beating. You know how the police used to do it back in the days. Even back in the 80s and 90s, they used to do that. So he goes to jail. He's drunk. He gets arrested for a disorderly conduct. Now, he gets released the next day or so, and he's really angry because he feels that he shouldn't have gotten beat down the way he did. And it looks like Henry wants revenge on the Officer Vance for the beating that he gave him. Now, I want to say later on, towards the end of the month, it's January 26th, 1893, and 3-year-old Myrtle Vance, she's the daughter of Henry Vance. She's outside of the family's home, not very far from where we're located at right now. She's outside playing, and when her mother comes outside to call her daughter in, she's nowhere to be found. So she tells her husband, I can't find Myrtle. So they start going to neighbors' homes saying, have you seen my daughter? Have you seen my daughter? And nobody's seen her. So immediately they let the police and the sheriff's department know that their daughter is missing. Now they start looking, and word quickly spreads around town that a 3-year-old girl is missing. Now, there was somebody, a couple people actually, that has said, oh, well, I seen her going along with some black guy. Maybe it was around, 4 o'clock in the afternoon or so. So a couple of the people that seen Myrtle walking around with this quote unquote black guy, they recognize him as Henry Smith. And one of them asked Henry, hey, what are you doing with that girl? And he's like, oh, I'm taking her to her mother. She got lost. Well, the next day, they find her body in this house in the pasture behind it or to the side of it. She was dead. She was on the ground. She had been covered with branches and leaves in a vain attempt to hide her body. They took her to what would then be a coroner's office to do an autopsy to find out what happened to her. And they were able to, find out through them doing an examination of her body was that it looks like she was strangled and that she was raped. So now we're looking for Henry Smith because he was last seen with her. Now, normally, you would go to this guy's job and, question him, but Henry Smith is nowhere to be found. So they go to his house to go look for Henry, and he's long gone. They questioned his wife, and they said, where was Henry yesterday on the 26th? And she says, I don't know. He didn't come home. He didn't get home until early today. And he gets home, and he just looked like he had been drinking, and he yells at me to make him breakfast. Now, at that time, his wife had heard about this girl being missing. So when the husband comes home, she says, hey, what's going on? She goes, somebody's telling me that you were seen with that little white girl. And he tells her, quote, I don't know what the hell you talk about with no little white girl. I don't mess with white folks. Now hurry up and make me some damn breakfast. I'm hungry. So after he eats, normally he would get up and go to work. But he didn't go to work. They go to his job, and he's nowhere to be found. Like, this guy is ghost. He's gone. So they, make a search party, and they're looking for this guy. This guy just doesn't leave town. You don't just up and leave. You go to work. So now he's a prime suspect because several people, including the mayor at the time here in Paris, Texas, claims anyways that they seen him holding the little girl's hand walking through town. Eventually, this guy is tracked down to a real little tiny town about 20 miles outside of Hope, Arkansas. So he's caught at, I guess, hopping a freight train. So they quickly apprehend him, and by this time now, it's 5 days have passed. So this guy's been on the run for 5 days, and this story has been printed out on many newspapers throughout Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas. So now there's a fervor. So now there's a lot of people looking for this guy. And of course, we can't ignore the racial component of this story. You have a black guy who was seen with a little white girl. She turns up dead, and he just skips town. So we got a prime suspect. His name is Henry Smith. So the deputies, they quickly capture him. Now, I think the Texas Rangers were the ones that transported him because they were the ones that usually do stuff like that, crossing state lines or what have you. So they get him, and they take him by train from Hope, Arkansas to Texarkana. Now, the original plan was to, of course, arrest him, try him for the murder, and throw him in prison. However, by the time they get to the train station at Texarkana, there's about 2,000 people waiting for this guy. And you know what they're waiting to do. They want to kill this guy. Now, the law enforcement officers that are tasked with defending this guy and making sure that nothing happens to him, they got the revolvers out, right? They got their revolvers out because they're like warning everybody to back up. They're warning everybody, back up, get away from him. If anybody touches him, we're going to shoot him. Or, excuse me, we're going to shoot you, not him. Well, we might shoot him too by accident, but you know what I mean. So at this time now, as law enforcement officers are escorting Henry Smith from one train in Texarkana to another, and you got this whole entire mob of people shouting a lot of words and saying that we're going to kill you and this and that. They bring him on to the next train for probably about the next 4 or 5 hour ride from Texarkana up here to Paris. So he gets off the train here, and they take him to the Lamar County Jail, and that's where he supposedly confesses to the crime. Again, you have more than a few people that have seen this guy with the little girl, and also, all of a sudden, why did you leave town? You don't have any money, and hopping a freight train, that's not something that normal people do if they want to travel, unless you're a hobo. Point being is, you're last seen with a 3-year-old girl that winds up murdered, and you're just hopping freight trains, trying to get out of town, quitting your job, leaving your family as quick as possible. Something doesn't add up. Now, we all know that mob justice, again, not as popular as it used to be, but it's still quite a thing, especially here in the South. Now, as he's sitting in the Lamar County Jail, he's probably expecting a trial. Maybe he's going to beat it. Maybe he'll get a lawyer, and maybe he'll be let go. Think again. He would later find out that not only will there not be a trial, there will not be a court case, but he is to be promptly executed. And he's going to be executed via the most inhumane way that they can think of. He's going to be set on fire, and he's told this. As a matter of fact, in a newspaper, it was published that he was basically set to be burned alive. Now, at this time, when he hears that he's going to be tortured to death, he begs the deputies, please just kill me. And they said, no, we're not going to kill you. We're going to kill you, but not the way you want to be killed. So at that time, Texas Governor Jim Hogg, who was, you're a governor of Texas, you're probably wanting to change, how these small towns, how they deal out their own brand of justice. So he sends a telegram to the authorities here in Paris, Texas, and he says, listen, there will not be any lynching. You guys are not going to take justice in your own hands. We need to let the criminal courts do their, conduct their, let justice conduct its process of finding this man guilty by a court of law, by a jury of his own peers, if you can find any, instead of taking the law into your own hands. Now, they didn't do exactly as the governor asked, but they did bring him to justice. As a matter of fact, in this picture, you can see this scaffolding. They painted the word justice on the side of it. So technically, they kind of sort of did bring him to justice, but not the justice, at least that Henry Smith was wanting to receive. So on February 1st, 1893, that is the day that he is going to be executed. But he ain't going to be hung. That scaffolding is not for him to be hung. That scaffolding is basically a stage that was made up for him to be tortured to death via fire. So as the newspapers are, advertising that this public execution is going to take place, all of the bars in Paris, they're closed the day before because they don't want a bunch of drunk people getting rowdy, getting crazier than they already get. All the bars are closed, and you got every train from coming into the station in Paris, Texas, is full of people. They're coming from Tulsa, Oklahoma. They're coming from Dallas, Texas. They're coming from all over the place. So at this time now, there is an estimated 10 to 15,000 people that have showed up to watch this public execution. So they bring Henry Smith up onto this 10-foot scaffolding, and they take off his shirt. And they tie him up to basically, I guess you can call it it's going to be a human bonfire. So they tie him at the stake. And back in those days, when there was a lynching, if you will, it was kind of the custom of the family members of the victim to start off the torture they would inflict it. So you had Henry Vance and his son, and I think two of his brothers. So they light a fire. So they're grabbing these pokers and these brands, these cast iron brands. They would sit it in the fire, wait for it to get real hot, and they started from the bottom of his feet, burning every square inch of flesh that they could. Now, it's unclear whether he had his clothes on during this process or if he was completely naked. But they burned. If it wasn't burned, it was going to be burned. And according to the very, very few people that, were quoted during this this torture / execution, that this guy was basically letting out these blood curdling screams. And basically, quote unquote, every orifice of his body was burned. They even burned out his eyes. And this guy is still alive while they're doing this. So they continue with the torture for about the next 50 minutes or so, not quite an hour. And every time he screams, it's almost like the crowd is just getting even more excited. And yeah, guys, there was no bars because they closed them all. You think people ain't bringing their own drink? You think those bars ain't serving a little bit of liquor outside on the, you know what I mean? You got all kinds of people probably sharing drinks. So yeah, people are pretty much, a lot of them I'm sure are pretty wasted. So this goes on, like I said, for almost an hour until finally this guy is still alive, and they set where he's tied up at the stake. They set it on fire. They pour kerosene oil all over him and they set him on fire while he's alive. And he's screaming and screaming. He's able, because of the flame burning through the rope, he's able to break free, and he basically jumps off of this funeral pyre, if you will, into the ground. And then the mob, basically, they grabbed this guy. They just grabbed him and they threw him back up there. And they threw him right into the fire until he died. And then after he died, I mean, they just charred his body into ash, and basically just to nothing. And then, of course, you have all kinds of people in the crowd. They want a souvenir, so they start picking off like pieces of his bones. And yeah, he was literally reduced to nothing but ashes and bones. So I'm pretty sure there's some families here in and around Texas that have little pieces of bone, family, souvenirs of the Henry Smith execution. And basically, that was all she wrote. This is the final resting place of Myrtle Vance. This was the girl that was murdered. And she's buried next to, I think you got her brother right here, Eugene Vance. And then you got, this would be her, this might be, it says wife of Jenny Vance. Not sure how she's related, but she was born in, let's see, well, buried in 1905, died age 69. Could be the mother. I don't see where Henry Vance is. Oh, he's right here. So Henry Vance, he actually died, I want to say about, maybe about 4 or 5 years later. He basically dropped dead in a saloon here in town. He became a drunk. Like, he would often go on these alcoholic benders, and he died. And, this story, as tragic as it is for this little girl's murder, it's often, I don't think the mob realized that in this story that his execution would overshadow her murder. So people, when they talk about this story, everyone talks about the brutal way in which he was executed. But we all forget that this little girl suffered a great and horrible death as well. Next time you're in the Paris, Texas area, come by and pay this little girl's grave a visit, if you will, yeah? Okay, guys, I am out of here. It is about 40 degrees. It's kind of cold. I'm going to get in my vehicle, warm up a little bit. Rest in peace to the Vances. A very horrendous story, to say the least. All right, I'll catch up with you on the next one. Peace out.